So hello and thanks for joining the webinar. So let's wait maybe a minute for everyone else to join the webinar. And while we are waiting, just to kind of get to know you. So where are you calling from? Did you join this webinar from? So I'm calling in from Zagreb, from Croatia. And yeah, if you want to let me know through the chat window, where are you calling from, so that just to get an idea of all the countries that are represented in this webinar. Okay, while I'm waiting for your inputs, just a couple of notes. So first of all, we are recording this webinar, and you'll be able to watch the webinar basically on the same page where you registered, if you actually registered on LinkedIn or YouTube. So basically the same page where you are watching this webinar, you will see also the recording of this webinar. If you signed up for the webinar through Advisera website, then we will send you an email with a link to the recording. Okay, second thing, you'll be able to download the presentation deck. And at the end of the webinar, I'll let you know how and where you can actually download this presentation deck. So stay tuned until the end of the webinar, and you'll be able to download this PDF. Okay, very well. So I think we can start now. So welcome to the webinar, how to integrate GDPR with ISO 27001. My name is Dejan Kosutic, and I'm the main ISO 27001 NIS2 and DORA expert at Advisera. And Advisera is a company that makes compliance easy to understand and simple to use. This webinar today is streamed through Zoom, but also through LinkedIn live events and YouTube Live. And it will last approximately 40 to 60 minutes. This really depends on the number of questions I'll receive from you. And yeah, I'll try to make this webinar as interactive as possible. So by all means, please do send me as many questions as you want, as you're interested in, and I'll try to answer them even before the Q&A session. So if you want, if you have some questions, I'll try to answer them as you send them, and then all the remaining questions I'll answer in the Q&A sessions. Okay, very well. So why is this really important, this integration between GDPR and 27001? Well, this is basically because GDPR is not only about some legal requirements, it's also about security, right? As you'll see later on, there are a couple of articles in GDPR which require you to implement security, especially Article 32. So basically, when you implement GDPR, you actually have to, when you comply with GDPR, you also have to take care about security, and therefore you have to think about this security aspect, not only privacy or legal aspect. Basically, the focus of the webinar today is really, I'll show you how to integrate this privacy part with the security part. And the security part will mainly be ISO 27001, which is, by the way, my main field of expertise. And yeah, basically this webinar today is made for anyone who is in charge of complying with GDPR or ISO 27001 in the company. So if you're acting as a CISO, or let's say data protection officer, or anyone, or a consultant maybe, then this webinar will certainly be interesting for you. Okay, so one of my main points today is that actually ISO 27001 and GDPR overlap, I would say 50%. So when you actually comply with, let's say, when you implement fully GDPR, this means that you will be at least 50% compliant with ISO 27001. But also vice versa. If you fully implement ISO 27001, you'll be, let's say, 50% compliant with GDPR. And again, this is because there is this overlap, and I'll show you more in more detail what this overlap exactly is, and that actually exists in both of these frameworks. This is, of course, something that you can use to more easily kind of integrate this security and privacy aspect. Okay, right. Let's move on now to the agenda. Yeah, I'll go through the agenda, but please do let me know which of these topics are the most interesting for you. So simply send me a note through the chat, and basically you'll then I'll be able to I'll be able to see what you're interested in the most, and then I'll try to focus on these topics that you're interested in. So anyway, I'll go through the topics. Let me know if any of these is of the most interesting for you. So first of all, I'll go through this overlap between 27001 and GDPR, basically what is the same. Then the next thing is I'll go through the things that are in common. Also things that are specific for GDPR that do not exist in 27001, and also something that does exist in 27001 and does not exist in GDPR, so that you just get an idea of where this integration is useful and where it is not very useful. And then I'll show you these 15 steps on how you can actually implement GDPR and 27001 at the same time. And then also a question of whether you should implement these two frameworks at the same time, or should you implement one after another. So it's also something that I'll cover in this last slide, and of course at the end we'll go through this Q&A session. Okay, good. As I mentioned previously, there is this, I would say, 50-50 principle. So if you implement, again, if you fully comply with one framework, then basically you're compliant with the other one of 50%. Now, we'll also share now with you this link to the article. The article is called Does ISO 27001 Implementation Satisfy EU GDPR Requirements? And if you joined this webinar through Zoom or through YouTube, you can simply click this link that you see now in the chat window, in the comments window. If you joined actually through LinkedIn, because of some limitations in LinkedIn, you can't click these links that we are sharing with you. But what you can do is, as a workaround, is simply copy the URL and then paste it into your browser, and the link will open normally. Okay, very well. So so basically to kind of read a little bit more about how 27001 can be useful for GDPR, you can read this article. But in any case, I'll cover most of these things in the webinar presentation today. Good. Okay, I see that we have some input regarding the agenda for me, it's interesting to hear about overlap, as currently I have touch with both topics in my project. Yeah, okay, certainly I'll cover this in the webinar today. So let's go a little bit more in detail. So what things are in common, and basically where actually these two frameworks overlap. So there is this Article 32 in GDPR, which is called Security of Processing, and it covers, or basically requires, companies that process personal data to actually have risk management, to use encryption to protect this personal data, to restore the availability of the data, meaning basically backup, access control, regular testing, assessing and evaluating the effectiveness, which is basically internal audit. And let's see exactly how this Article 32 looks like. So I'll switch now the screen and show you. Just give me a second, please. Yeah, so here I'm showing you this full text of EU GDPRs, and you can actually find this on our website, and we'll send you now the link to this full text of GDPR. Okay, in any case, when I go to this, I'm not going to go through this whole GDPR now, of course, we don't have the time, but when you go for this section 2, which shows articles 32 to 34, when you click on it, you will find this Article 32, Security of Processing. So let's see exactly how it looks like. So it's rather short. It doesn't really tell you too much on how you need to implement security in your company, but it does mention pseudonymization, ensuring confidentiality, integrity, availability, resilience, ability to restore availability of the personal data, what else? Regular testing, assessing, evaluating. So basically all these things are here. Here you have the risk management, likelihood, severity, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, it's not, I mean, it does say these things, but it doesn't tell you too much about it. So in any case, the requirements are kind of similar, but 27001 will provide you more details on how to implement this. But I'll come to this later on in the webinar. Anyway, Article 33, not so important now. This is about notification about personal breach and personal data breach, and also 34, communication of personal data breach to the data subject. So 32 is really the I would say, main article when it comes to security in GDPR. Good. Now let me go back to my presentation. Let's move on to the next slide. And next slide are also some other articles which are I would say relevant for security and that overlap with 27001. So there is this. So mainly I'm now referencing articles 28, 32, 33, 34, 39, and 82. And these are the. So there is this relationship that you need to, I would say, you need to control the suppliers and processors in terms of the security and how they handle the personal data in a secure way. You need to handle incidents and data breaches, and you basically need to analyze them, report them, and so on and so forth. You need to raise awareness of your employees. You have to train your people in the company. And of course, you have to ensure this confidentiality, integrity, availability. So basically, all of these things are also specified in GDPR, and basically you have the same requirements in 27001. Again, 27001 is more detailed when it comes to these requirements. Let me just see if, okay, very well. Now, let's move on to the things that are specific for GDPR and that do not exist in 27001. So what are the main differences? Of course, there are lots of differences because GDPR in itself is a privacy regulation, and there are many things that are specified there. So personal data protection policy, so a top-level document which needs to, which needs to specify how you handle privacy in your company. There is no such requirement in 27001. Obviously, this needs to be, I would say, implemented as part of GDPR, as part of your privacy part of the implementation. By the way, we'll share with you now this link to an article called A Summary of 10 Key GDPR Requirements. And there you can actually go through these most important things that GDPR requires. So if this is your first, let's say, encounter of GDPR, then you can use this article to get some kind of a general overview of this regulation. Also, notices. So basically, how you notify the people signing up on your website or otherwise providing you with personal data. There is no such requirement in 27001. Data protection officer, so there is a requirement in GDPR, especially for companies processing larger amounts of personal data. Funnily enough, 27001 does not require security officer or any other, let's say, security-based person, but in GDPR this does exist. Also, you have to list the processing activities, personal data processing activities in GDPR. There is no such requirement in 27001. You need to have this legal basis for processing of personal data, and of course, basically, if the consent is one of these legal bases, then you need to collect consents for processing personal data. Again, there is no such a requirement in 27001. We'll also share now a link to this article called Is Consent Needed? 6 legal bases to process personal data according to GDPR. So it's also one article that can give you a good overview of this topic. Data subject access requests. So no such requirement in GDPR. In 27001. This is, I would say, exclusive for GDPR. Data protection impact assessment. So basically, it's I would say, if you are more, let's say, knowledgeable about 27001, then you could call this data protection impact assessment something like a risk assessment, but more, I would say, a complex and yeah, of course, focused on personal data and what can go wrong with personal data, because this is how you make decisions on how you need to protect this personal data. Cross-border data transfer. So this is if you are exporting data into third countries, meaning out of European Union. So then you have to follow some very specific rules. And there is also another article actually that we published rather lately, and this is called what is GDPR transfer impact assessment and how to implement it. So you'll see now the link to this article that explains these things in more detail, and data breach notifications. So again, there is no such direct requirement in 27001. So in any case, there is a lot in GDPR that is not covered in 27001. So don't think that with 27001 you can cover most of the requirements in GDPR, because you won't. I mean, this is a reality. 27001 can help you only with security, but not with all this, I would say, privacy or legal requirements that you see on this slide. All right, now let's see. Where is 27001 specific? So what is not covered in GDPR? So first of all, 27001 requires you to handle your documents, to control your documents. So basically, publishing, approving, making sure that the latest version is available, this kind of things. So this is something that that is specific for 27001. And here is a link to an article called How to Manage Documents According to ISO 27001. So this article will give you a very good overview of this topic. The next thing that is specific for 27001 is this defining the scope. Basically, ISO 27001 allows you to select the scope that you want for your company for handling security. And there is no such concept in GDPR, because GDPR very clearly says, whenever you process personal data, this is your scope. So there's no, I would say, freedom for you to choose the scope. Basically, everything, everywhere that you have personal data, this is the scope of your GDPR application. Yeah, also there is an article, all you need to know about setting the ISO 27001 scope. You'll get it now, this link in the chat window. Also, there is this requirement for writing a top-level information security policy. No such requirement in GDPR. GDPR does require the top-level, let's say, policy for handling privacy, but not for handling security. So there is such requirement in 27001. 27001 also requires a statement of applicability. Basically, this is a list of all the controls according to Annex A of ISO 27001, and then defining which of these controls are applicable and which are not. And this is something that you have to decide based on risk assessment. So there is no such concept in GDPR. Yeah, also you'll see now the link to this article in the chat window. Then you have to create this risk treatment plan. Basically, this is, I would say, an implementation plan for the controls that you marked as applicable in the statement of applicability. Then there is this requirement for management review. This is where your senior management needs to basically review the whole security posture, all of your security processes, your KPIs, your measurements, internal audit results, these kind of things, to get I would say, a holistic picture of security, and then make some decisions. And unfortunately, there is no such requirement in GDPR. Also, you'll see now in the chat window this article which explains why is management review important for 27001. And finally, there are these corrective actions. So basically, this is where you take a systematic way to resolve any non-conformities, right? Anything that went wrong or where you're not compliant. So the standard specifies, well, basically a clear process for handling such situations. These are called corrective actions. So again, all of these, 7 or so items, requirements do not exist in GDPR, even though, you know, I mean, since I'm dealing with 27001 for a long time, I do see, you know, that some of these things can be quite useful for GDPR, like, you know, document management, where you set clear rules on how documents need to be handled. Of course, scope is not relevant because scope is very clear for GDPR. Statement of applicability, where you, I would say, transparently show which controls you're going to implement to handle security, not only for 27001, but also for the privacy side, right? For GDPR, risk treatment plan as an implementation plan, right? Because if you don't have a clear plan on how to implement all of these controls, you might actually get into trouble. Management review, you know, forcing your senior management to review not only security but also privacy, I would say would be a very good thing. And these corrective actions are also a very good way to, I would say, follow up on any problems that you might have. And interestingly enough, I'm also dealing with DORA and NIS2 regulations, and these two regulations are cybersecurity regulations published by European Union. And there, actually, these two regulations do have the concept of the management review, the corrective actions. So it seems to me that you know, these EU regulations did kind of evolve and introduce some further concepts from well, 27001 or some other cybersecurity standards. And even though that this was not present in GDPR, which was published, what, like 5 or 6 years earlier. Okay, anyway, now let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, let's now go for these steps. So if you decide actually to implement 27001 and GDPR at the same time, so what are the, let's say, most logical steps that will enable you to implement both of these standards in a minimum amount of time? So first, you should start with these preparations for the project. So define who is the project manager, who is the project owner, you know, what are the deadlines, what are the steps, this kind of thing. So basically, you know, without a clear project structure, you won't be able to complete this project. And then you have to identify all the requirements. And basically, this is now the ISO 27001 side. It's I would say, because of 27, not because of GDPR. So you have to identify all the security requirements. Of course, requirements are, you know, is Article 32 from GDPR, but there are also some other requirements. Typically, these come through the contracts that you've signed with your clients, and you know, usually these clients have security clauses. And this is also something that these are the security requirements you have to identify and then comply with. And there is also an article which will help you with this, and it's called How to Identify ISMS Requirements of Interested Parties. So you'll see now the link in the chat. Okay, and then you define the scope. Again, this is on the 27001 side, because for GDPR scope is clear. So on 27001 side, you can decide whether you go for the whole company or you go only for one part of your company. Since you implement GDPR at the same time, then the minimum scope needs to be, you know, all of your processes or departments where you process personal data. Okay, this would be the minimum. Of course, you can go wider than this scope. Okay, now the fourth step are these general policies. So basically here you write the top level policy on how you handle personal data. This is where you write this top level information security policy. So you define some major, let's say, responsibility rules and let's say objectives for your privacy and for your security. And then you basically go for this step where you map all the processing activities, and this is the step that is primarily related to GDPR. So you want to map all the activities where you process personal data. And this is a crucial step because if you don't map all of your processes or processing activities, then you really won't know exactly where you have personal data in your company. So this step is really crucial because otherwise you simply are going to miss lots of your personal data and you won't identify it. So this is something you have to do for GDPR. Okay, the next step is to start managing your data subject rights. Again, this is for GDPR. This is where you have to define what are the, I would say, what is the basis of processing of personal data, because in the step previous you will know where you process personal data, but the next step is really to find out if you actually process all of this data in the legal way, because if not, then you have to resolve this situation and make all of this processing of personal data legal. And yeah, we'll send you now the link. It's called 8 Fundamental Rights of Data Subjects under the GDPR. So you can read a little bit about what are these data subject rights that you can actually, that you have to comply with. Okay, now the next step is really both, I would say, on 27001 and GDPR. So you have to assess all the risks. So what can go wrong with the data that you're processing, both personal data and other data that you identify as important in your company. And this is where you focus on this confidentiality, integrity, availability, and then this is where you define all of these controls, safeguards that you need to implement to be compliant with the not only to be compliant, but actually to minimize these risks to I would say acceptable level. And then in the next step, you do something that is called data protection impact assessment, and this is the step required by GDPR. And this is basically where you focus on, let's say, specifically on personal data and what can go wrong with this. So you can consider this as a kind of risk assessment, but more complex one. And by the way, this is why we recommend typically that you separate data protection impact assessment from the risk assessment, because risk assessment follows, I would say, one logic, and the data protection impact assessment follows a different logic, because it's quite prescribed by GDPR. Yeah, and there is an article also that you can that we'll send you now the link for. So it's called 5 Phases of the EU GDPR Data Protection Impact Assessment. So you can open this article and learn more about what you need to do there. Okay, yeah, and then for 27001 side, you can you must write this statement of applicability. So this is where you, as I mentioned earlier, define where you list all the controls from Annex A and define which are applicable, how you need to implement them. Of course, you're not going to do this only for your security part. You're going to also list all the controls that are relevant for privacy, for GDPR. So again, you will have a single document which will basically describe your whole security profile for both security and for privacy. Okay, the next step is writing this risk treatment plan. Again, this is basically an implementation plan for all the safeguards that you are planning to implement, and you have to define there, what safeguards you need to implement, who is in charge, what are the deadlines, what is the budget, how many, which kind of people you need to implement them. It needs to be quite detailed. And then, of course, you start implementing all of these security controls. Again, these are not security controls only for 27, it's also for privacy. For example, this, I don't know, encryption or anonymization, all of these things you have to start implementing according to the risk treatment plan. And in parallel to this, you're actually doing the training and awareness, because what we see in practice, once companies write all of their security policies and procedures, but if they try to enforce them in their companies without training their people, training their employees on how they need to implement them, and without telling them why these policies are needed in the first place, then they face big problems. And for that purpose, really, it's training and awareness is really crucial, and it needs to go in parallel actually to implementation of all of these security controls. All right, now let's move on to the last steps. You actually have to perform internal audit. So this is something that is basically mandatory both according to 27 and GDPR. So you have to give this job of, let's say, independent review, internal review of what's going on with your privacy, with your security, and then this report needs to go to the senior management so that they are actually informed of, let's say, the real state of your security and privacy. And 27001 requires you to do this formal management review so that the management receives all this information and then makes some crucial decisions around security, and and as I recommend also to review the privacy and make decisions around privacy. And finally, you go for these corrective actions. So whenever either internal auditor or someone else finds a nonconformity, basically when these corrective actions are needed, then you need this systematic way of resolving these, because otherwise what can happen is that you simply identify some problems or nonconformities and then simply forget about them, or it simply kind of gets stuck without resolving them. So a systematic way where you are not forgetting about these problems is very important for these things to actually be ultimately fixed. Okay, so if you're interested in let's say implementing separately 27001 from GDPR, we'll send you now links to two articles which speak about separate steps for GDPR implementation and separate steps for 27001 implementations, and you'll see them now in the chat window. Good. Now, what I'll show you now is basically a way for you to let's say improve or speed up the writing of all the documents that are needed for GDPR and for 27001. So let me switch the screen. So basically, this is what I'm showing you is this EU GDPR and ISO 27001 integrated documentation toolkit. So basically, it's a set of documents that contains all the documents that are needed for compliance with both GDPR and for 27001. And as you will see, these steps here, you see several folders. And these folders are basically recommended steps in the implementation, and as you'll notice, they are very similar to these 15 steps that I presented in the webinar. So basically, when you open any of these documents, then you'll see the documents. So for example, this ISMS step scope, so when you open it, you will see this is a Word document which basically gives you everything that you need to define define your ISMS scope, right? So going back to here, I mean, you can also send me through chat a message if you want me to open any other particular document, but let's go for risk assessment and treatment. So let's say go for this risk assessment methodology. And here, again, you have the document which specifies how you actually need to do the risk assessment. So it gives you, the overview of the process, assets, threats, vulnerabilities, and then determining risk owners and consequences and likelihood. Of course, how you use these scales for consequences and likelihood, risk acceptance criteria. And then, of course, we have other templates, for example, where you list all the risks, where you list risk treatment, and so on. So without going further into detail, again, if you want, I can show you some other documents, but the point is here, this kind of a tool you can actually use to speed up considerably this whole implementation of these two frameworks. Okay, we'll share with you now the link to this integrated toolkit. So when you click this link, you will be able to open You will see all the information about these documents. You will be able to see a free preview of all of these documents, and yeah, you can simply play around with it and see if this is something that can help you. Okay, I see a question from Ligia. Are the examples shown from risk assessment based on ISO 27005? So yes, when we did the risk assessment methodology and also risk assessments, we based it on both 27001 and 27005. What is important to understand is that 27005 is not mandatory. So basically you can, if you want to, you can take some good things out of it. And this is exactly what we did. We took, I would say, the best parts of 27005 and included it in our risk assessment and treatment methodology, and also in these other templates which are used for 27000 for risk assessment. Okay, very well. Yeah, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, now the question is, should you implement GDPR and 27001 in parallel, so basically at the same time, or should you implement it one after another? And I mean, there is no definite answer to this. It really depends on what is your situation. So for example, what is more important to you? You might, for example, you might be a company based in, let's say, I don't know, France. Of course, France being in the European Union, the companies have to comply with GDPR. If this is the case, you might be in a situation where GDPR is more important for you than 27001. So you would actually go first for GDPR and then second for ISO 27001. Or you might be, I don't know, a company based in US, and this company might not need to comply with the GDPR, and in this case such a company might go for 27001 first and then for GDPR second. Or you might simply have a situation where basically you need actually to implement both of these at the same time. You might be actually starting to process personal data, and also at the same time one of your major clients asking you to be 27001 compliant. Well, in this case you need to go for both of these frameworks at the same time, and then you can use these steps that I've shown you during the webinar, on how to implement them basically together. So it really depends on your situation, your specific needs in your company. Good. Now let's move on to the next slide, and this is really about biggest challenges with GDPR and 27001 implementation, and this is based on the inputs from that I received through email from you, and thank you for these inputs. Yeah, let me go through these challenges and provide you some tips on how to address them. So one of the inputs was that less structured organizations may think that it takes too long, draining too many energies and resources. And yes, very often companies or senior management in the companies think that these kind of compliance things are extremely long, extremely costly, and extremely boring, which, okay, basically they are boring, so no doubt about it, but that they basically don't, that they're really kind of too, I would say, too much, especially for smaller companies. But the thing is, it doesn't have to be so. You can really, I would say, kind of scale down these projects so that you actually fully comply with both of these frameworks, but at the same time that you are not spending as much resources as you might think that they would. And you can also scale down this whole documentation thing so that it does not, I would say, create problems with your regular operations. Because very often when companies start to implement 27001, they think, oh no, now we'll have to do I don't know, 5 extra steps, which will take us only, additionally 20% of the time. But this is not true. I mean, there is no such requirement really in 27001 to make your processes more complex. No, it's really no such thing, right? So basically what you have to do is really, I would say, adapt this security according to your business processes, of course, according to your risks. And if you did not cover some risks, then you will have to implement some new controls. But the point is, you can actually scale down this compliance thing to something that is, well, you'll never enjoy it, but you'll certainly, you won't feel too much extra burden. So the point is, you have to find the right tools, the right methodology, really, to make it bearable, so to say. Okay, identifying GDPR legal implications through data mapping. So yes, this listing of all these processing activities is crucial because it does, again, without it, you won't be able to know where you process personal data. And this can be, yes, I admit, this can be a lengthy process. But this is actually done best if you sit down with the heads of each department and then basically discuss with them, where and how they process personal data. For example, in HR department, so human resources, obviously will have lots of personal data. In legal department, you will have also personal data. If your, I don't know, if your website is, let's say, providing some, if your website actually requires, registering your users, then of course you will also have personal data which you collect. So this is then IT department, but also if this data is then used by someone else in your company, then you will have some other departments as well. So basically what you have to do is, if you are a DPO, you have to do interviews with all of your departments, head of the departments, and make sure that you list all the touch points, or more precisely, you can actually ask these people what are the channels through which you actually collect information from the outside. And then usually this is the best way to catch all these, I would say, ways that you process personal data. Okay, the next challenge is trying to understand data management across the technology estate in relation to access control, storage, processing, privacy, retention, and deletion. So once you actually process, once you list all the processing data, personal data processing activities, then of course you will need to match it towards the basically databases where you have these, where you process this personal data, and then you will know exactly what kind of safeguards you will need to use to protect this personal data. And this is where 27001 is quite useful, especially if you use this asset-based approach to risk assessment and treatment, because for each asset, then you define what kind of safeguards you need to protect this data. Okay, it doesn't have to be only personal data, but in any case, you will then have, especially when using 27001, you will have all the assets, and then what kind of safeguards you're using for each of these assets. And of course, these safeguards will include the access control, the backups, the I don't know, encryption, and all kinds of things, and you will have easily kind of mapped, you will have this very nice map to make sure that you cover everything. Okay, how to integrate tools such as data protection impact assessment alongside of risk registers without making the entire framework unmanageable and resource reliant. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I think you should start with the risk assessment. This is a kind of a lighter version of doing this risk assessment, and do this risk assessment according to 27001. And then once you define in which processing activities you also have personal data, then do additionally the data protection impact assessment on top of this risk assessment. So you will use some results of the risk assessment as a kind of the baseline for DPIA, and DPIA would be, I would say, a kind of an add-on to the risk assessment that you're doing for according to 27001. So I see this as a two-step process where risk assessment is, I would say, a lighter approach, and then DPIA is built upon it, but specifically only for personal data. Good. Yeah, so let's move on to the conclusion and then go for the Q&A. So as you can see, GDPR and 27001 have a lot in common, and in fact 27001 does cover roughly 50% of GDPR requirements and vice versa. So if you have the need to actually be compliant with both of these, then you can implement them together within one project. So I mean at the same time or one after another, but in any case you will have, I would say, lots of benefits that can lots of overlapping areas that where actually you need to implement only one thing that can cover two frameworks. And of course, for that purpose, you can use Advisera's integrated documentation toolkit. We've already sent you the link to it. And also, if you would like to have a meeting with our toolkit expert, he can actually show you any document that you're interested in. So we'll send you now the link to this for having a meeting for scheduling a call with our toolkit expert. Great. Yeah, let's move on now to the questions and answers session. So, of course, please do send me any questions that you're interested in, that you want me to answer. And while you're sending these questions, just a couple of notes. Feel free to reach out to me directly and ask any questions via email, and we'll send you now my email address so you can contact me directly. Second thing is you can follow me on LinkedIn and YouTube, and so you'll find on my LinkedIn profile, you'll find I post daily, let's say I would say the most important articles that I find on the internet related to cybersecurity governance, ISO 27001, these kind of topics. So if you want to stay in touch, let's say, with the newest and most important developments, you can actually follow me on LinkedIn. And on YouTube, I publish lots of videos on ISO 27001, NIS2, DORA. I'm planning also to do something like for GDPR, for security aspect of GDPR, but I still didn't do it. I'll probably do it in the next couple of months. So if you want to learn in this video format, then feel free to follow me on YouTube as well. And the third thing is my next webinar will be in 2 weeks, and it will be about ISO 27001 implementation steps. So if you want to learn in a bit more in detail about 27001 implementation specifically, then you can sign up for this webinar. And we'll share now with these links for signing up for our webinars. So if you open any of these links, you'll see you can actually sign up there. So you have this link for signing up on Advisera website or on LinkedIn page or on YouTube page. Okay, very well. Now let me go through a couple of questions I received before the webinar. So Eugene was asking which ISO 27001 controls must be implemented to cater for GDPR. So basically, there are, let's say, two answers to this question. So first of all, there is this control called 5.34, and this is about personal process, basically the PII, the processing of personal identifiable information. So if you process any personal data, then in the statement of applicability, you need to mark this control 5.34 as applicable. So this is, let's say, one level. Now, the second level is basically how you actually protect any personal data. And for that purpose, you will use a larger number of controls, backup encryption, access control. So everything and anything that we mentioned in the webinar today. So on this, I would say, second, more detailed level, you will select, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 controls from NXA to make this protection. And there is no definite list of these controls because they will depend on your risks, on the types of data that you're using, and so on. So in the first, I would say, instance, there is this one control which is directly related to PII. And in the second, I would say, step, so to say, you have to select all controls that are here that you can use for data protection. Okay, another question that came through Damiano, from Damiano. Can an ISO 27001 auditor be also the data protection officer? Now, this is an interesting question, and I would say you can do it for smaller companies if you have, I don't know, like 10 employees, maybe 20 employees. Because it's hard actually to find in such smaller companies. It's hard to find two separate persons for these functions. However, if you have a couple of hundred employees or a couple of thousand employees, then it is highly recommended that you actually separate these functions. Now, why is it better to separate it? Because there might be some conflict of interest there, right? Because internal auditor we'll need to check, the internal auditor for 27001, we need to check the implementation of all the security controls. But, some of these security controls are also the controls that are kind of where DPO, Data Protection Officer, is in charge. So there is, I would say, some conflict of interest. So again, from the practical point of view, if you are a very small company, you can do it. But for, I don't know, if you're at least 100 or 200 employees, I would it would be much better to separate these two functions. Okay, great. I don't see any other questions coming in. So then let me wrap up the webinar. Just a few words before we finish. So as I mentioned, this webinar was intended really to give you an overview of how to integrate GDPR in 27001. And really the idea of this webinar was not to give you a detailed, instructions for, how to implement each and every step. And of course, for that purpose, you can open up these articles that we've sent you just to learn more. And you can also take a look at this toolkit, which will provide you with more idea on how to write these documents. With regards to this PDF presentation deck, we'll publish it on the same page where you're watching the webinar now. So if you joined through LinkedIn or if you joined through YouTube, leave this same page open where you are watching the webinar now. And in the comment section, in about 10, maybe 15 minutes, you will see that we'll publish the link to this PDF presentation deck, which you will be able to download. And also in the same comments, you will see, again, all of these links that we've sent you now, that we've shared with you during the webinar. You will also see them again published in these comments on these same pages. Now, if you joined the webinar through Advisera website, then we will send you a link to the PDF presentation deck through email. And we'll send this email either in a couple of hours or maybe tomorrow. So latest by tomorrow morning, you'll see these this email in your inbox with not only the link for downloading the PDF presentation deck, but also other links that we shared during the webinar. And finally, we'll send you a link to also for a short survey. So it's really short, only 3 questions, and I would really appreciate if you could open it up and give you your feedback. And this will help me improve this my webinars. And that would be all. Thank you very much for your participation, and I hope you have enjoyed this webinar. Have a nice day.